So I just binge watched all 10 episodes of Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story on Netflix. The sacrifices I make for you. Overall, I loved it, but the writers did get a few things wrong. And since being a nitpicking, detail-obsessed murder nerd is kind of my whole thing, let's get into it. Welcome back, and thank you so much for spending time with me. If you're new here, my name is Delaney, and normally I like to take deep dives into horrible/interesting cases, but I also like to watch and review movies based on true crimes. I've got a whole playlist. For today's episode, I'm looking at the much anticipated docudrama series created by Ian Brennan, who's probably best known for Glee, and Ryan Murphy, who worked with Brennan on Glee, but is probably better known for American Horror Story. He was also the producer of the American Crime Story series, so he has some true crime chops too. And so let me get this clear right up front. This series was incredible. Evan Peters knocked it out of the park as Jeffrey Dahmer. And honestly, the entire cast was outstanding. Richard Jenkins as his father Lionel and Niecy Nash as his neighbor Glenda Cleveland all deserve Oscars or Emmys or whatever it is. The series begins with the escape of Dahmer's final would-be victim, Tracy Edwards, and then is told in a series of flashbacks as Dahmer confesses to the police. It kind of jumps around in time, but the title cards, along with the music and costumes, make it pretty clear when each scene is happening. It does make the pacing kind of inconsistent, like a car with a sticky clutch, but it gets you where you're going. But as good as it was, there were still a few things the writers either left out or got wrong altogether. Starting with, right off in the series, the character of Patrick Kennedy is, well, not really a character. In real life, Kennedy did play a much bigger role in the case than just interrogating Dahmer in the station. He was called to the scene, and when he saw the head in the freezer, he said he screamed. For whatever reason, that wasn't included, which is a shame because I think it was a wasted cinematic moment to see a big, tough cop like Kennedy scream from what he sees in the fridge. Kennedy also spent a lot of time with Dahmer after his arrest, and even formed almost a friendship with him. It was Kennedy who lent Dahmer the infamous blue striped shirt that he wore to court. It's really not that important, but there was enough runtime in the series that it could have been included. This really surprises me about Ryan Murphy, but he actually sanitized the state that Conrack synthesophone was in when he escaped. In real life, he was, as Nicole Childress said in her 911 call, butt naked, and he wasn't just bleeding out of his head, but from between his legs too. And the officers, Balsersack and Gabrish, didn't just blow the women off when they reported it. They told the women to shut the fuck up about it and even threatened to arrest them for interfering. Seriously, fuck these dudes. In episode 3, it shows Dahmer hiding in the bushes with a bat, waiting for the jogger that he saw every day. When the jogger approaches, Dahmer jumps out and threatens him with the bat, but backs down at the last minute. In real life, there was a jogger who went by his house every day, and Dahmer had fantasies of holding the unconscious man in his bed. And he did decide to try and make those fantasies come true by knocking him out with a bat. So one day, he hid in the bushes lying in wait. But the jogger didn't come by that day, so Dahmer just kind of gave up and never tried again. Once again, the series kind of glossed over just how bad the stuff Dahmer did was. First, just a minor detail, he was driving a VW Bug when he picked Hicks up. But more importantly, after he murdered him, Dahmer did the things that he did with all his later victims. He had sex with the body, and while he was dismembering it. At first, he stored Hicks's body parts in the crawl space under the house, but once they started stinking, he tried stuffing them into a culvert. And when that didn't work, only then did he bag them up to take them out to the dump, where he was stopped by the police officer, who apparently didn't recognize the smell of weeks-old decomp. Episode 4 shows Dahmer in the army drugging a fellow soldier, and it implies that he raped him. The truth of the matter is, he did this to at least 2 men that we know of. When one of the men, Billy Capshaw, tried to report it to his superiors, he was ignored and called names, something that sexual assault victims in the military still face to this day. In the series, Dahmer lives in the house with his grandma in an upstairs bedroom. In reality, he lived in the finished basement, which had a separate entrance, which made it easier for him to bring men home and kill and dismember them without his grandma's knowledge. In fact, he'd taken the body of his second victim, Stephen Toomey, the one he murdered at the Ambassador Hotel, back to his grandmother's house to dismember his remains. He then murdered and dismembered 3 more men there. The series never really got into this, but for a while he first started living with his grandma, Dahmer did go to church with her and tried to keep on the straight and narrow. He said that what tipped him over the edge was a chance encounter at a public library. He said a man there slipped him a note offering to give him a BJ. He didn't take the man up on his offer, but he said that after that he couldn't resist his urges anymore, and that's when he started visiting Milwaukee's gay bars and bathhouses. Episode 4 includes a scene where Dahmer drugs and rapes a man and leaves him OD'd in the room. The bathhouse attendant tells the paramedics that this was the second time he'd done that. He bans Dahmer from his bathhouse and tells him that he's told 2 of the other bathhouses and now he's banned from them too. But that scene really minimizes just how many times Dahmer drugged and sexually assaulted men at bathhouses and private club rooms. Multiple times his victims OD'd, though thankfully none of them died, and he'd get banned. This went on for over a year between 1986 and 87, and he victimized at least a dozen men that we know of. In 1987, after his arrest for masturbating in front of 2 12-year-olds in public, he was ordered to undergo counseling. It was only a few months after that he killed Toomey, and then 2 more men, all while lying his ass off to the counselor. In his confession, he later told police that at one point he had one of his victims' heads in the trunk of his car while he was at the counselor's office. There's a scene in episode 7 where Dahmer offers Cleveland a tuna sandwich, and it tells me that the writers have watched the Jeffrey Dahmer files, because Dahmer did give one of his neighbors a tuna sandwich, but that neighbor wasn't Cleveland, it was Pamela Bass. In the Jeffrey Dahmer files, Bass talks about how she and her husband had befriended Dahmer and would sometimes invite him over for cookouts. At one point, he brought them tuna sandwiches, and they ate them. To this day, she says she's afraid she might have eaten somebody's body part. While the series does occasionally show the missing flyers for his victims, it surprisingly didn't portray the fact that at some point, Milwaukee's gay community had a strong suspicion that a serial killer was among them. Remember, in the late 80s and early 90s, Milwaukee's gay community was not as out as it is now. Many of them were still in the closet, and they used nicknames to hide their real identities. Their families often had no idea that they were going to gay bars. And many members were transient, coming and going frequently, so their disappearances weren't always noticed. But some in the community started noticing how many men were going missing, especially in 1990, when Dahmer was murdering people nearly every week. But no one trusted the police enough to report their suspicions, or if they did, they were ignored. I think it's good that the series included the backlash by the Black community after Dahmer's arrest, but they could have spent some of that time highlighting the other communities affected by Dahmer and their response to his crimes. The LGBTQ and Asian communities were also criticizing the Milwaukee PD for their racism and homophobia, which is what allowed Dahmer to get away with so many murders. Along with Black activists, these groups were pressuring the police to reform the way that they treated their communities and to fire Balcersak and Gabrish for the way that they mishandled the Konarak case. Besides a 52-page report on the officers' gross negligence in that case, the Milwaukee PD did institute some changes, including recruitment in the LGBTQ, Asian, and Black communities, as well as more cultural sensitivity training. But considering that Balcersak and Gabrish were eventually reinstated and awarded back pay and promoted, I'm not sure those changes were really enough. After the Jeffrey Dahmer case, the gay community changed too, for the better. Folks stopped using nicknames as much, and more of them started living out and proud. After the initial backlash against them, they stepped up their education and activism, and a number of inter-community coalitions were formed in response to it. The case was a real landmark moment for Milwaukee's LGBTQ community, and many still describe events as being before Dahmer and after Dahmer. Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story, is only one of many dramas about one of the worst and most infamous serial killers in American history. But I will say it was one of the best, second only to My Friend Dahmer, in my opinion, of course. It wasn't perfect, and it probably could have told the story in 8 episodes instead of 10, but it still gets high marks from me. What did you think of the series? Was there anything I left out? Would you like to see me review one of the other movies about Dahmer? Or do you have another true crime-based movie you'd like to see me review? Let me know in the comments. And be sure and like and subscribe, all that stuff for the algorithm. Till next time, Darklings.